Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this event. This is News from the Frontline, Fighting Racism and the Far Right During the Pandemic. This event is part of this year's European Forum for Left, Green and Progressive Ideas. We're now live on the European Forum Facebook page, so if you wish to share the video, please do so. Over the past few years, we've seen the biggest upsurge of the far right since the 1930s. This has taken many forms, from street attacks and mobilizations to holding high government office. Wherever they are, they use racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism to spread hate and fear. They attack trade unionists and the left, and the rights and liberties of us all. They are now weaponizing the pandemic for their own ideological ends. And of course, there is a strong fight back too, and the defeat of Trump is a step forward. But there is much work for us to do. Today, we are hearing from those who are in the front line of this struggle. We have a great platform of speakers from across Europe. They will each speak for 8 minutes, then we will have discussion with you. Please do write your questions in the Q&A and share links and comments in the chat. And I just want to give a big thank you to our interpreters today. Please select the option of your choice at the bottom of your screen. And also thank you to Gala Kabaj, who is our rapporteur for today. Gala works on this subject for Transform Europe, and she will make a report on our discussion and proposals for action to the forum's closing event on the 28th of November. So without further ado, over to our first speaker. It's a real pleasure to welcome Diane Abbott MP, speaking on the rise of racism and Black Lives Matter. Diane is a British parliamentarian and former British Shadow Home Secretary in the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. Diane is a lifelong anti-racist campaigner. Welcome, Diane. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here speaking at this very important conference about fighting racism and the far right. We're facing internationally what you could call a syndemic. That is to say, a combination of the pandemic and a long-term crisis of inequality and racism. And I couldn't speak to the subject of fighting racism without talking about the US presidential election and the role of Black Lives Matter. We have defeated Trump, which was an important thing to do because he was so identified with white nationalism and a very crude appeal to racism. But he could not have won without progressive forces and without the energy that was mobilized by Black Lives Matter. It's clear that the votes of Black people, the votes of people of color, and the daughters and sons of migrants were decisive in winning the election for Biden. We saw that in Pennsylvania, for instance, Michigan and Atlanta, where the huge Black communities in Philadelphia, Detroit, and Atlanta eventually brought those states home for Biden. Yet you'll find some elements in the Democratic Party claiming that the Democrats lost votes because of their radicalism. But nothing could be further from the truth. Not just Black voters, but Latino communities helped to deliver Arizona for Biden. And one of the positive results of these elections has been the electing of 18 Democratic Socialists of America and what they call the squad of mainly young, progressive women of colour continues to grow, which is, I think, is probably one of the most positive things to come out of the American elections. But the argument which you hear from some wings of the Democratic Party, that the party was too associated with radicalism, with socialism, and with Black Lives Matter, is just wrong. In fact, according to exit polls, Black Lives Matter as a movement was far more popular than either Trump or Biden, with the support of 57% of the American population. It's remarkable that it has this much support when it has been so demonized. So the idea you can be damaged by association with something which is more popular than you makes no sense. So to move forward in 2024 and to do anything purposeful in the next 4 years, the Democrats in America need to embrace that radicalism. They need to embrace that grassroots energy, and they need to work with it, and they need to work with the Black Lives Matter movement, so they will win even more seats in Congress and will win the next presidential election. In this country, we've seen, very sadly, racism against Black people, against people from the Indian subcontinent, and anti-Semitism. But sadly, we've also seen a rise in anti-Chinese racism or xenophobia. Of course, racists don't distinguish much between those who are ethnically Chinese or Japanese or Korean or other nationalities. But this anti-Chinese racism, partly whipped up by Trump, who insists on referring to coronavirus as a Chinese virus, is the addition to the violent, long-standing racism that we see against Black people, Muslims and Jews and other ethnic minorities in Britain. The finding from the group Protection Approaches on Reported Hate Crime says that in the first quarter of 2020, hate crime against Chinese people went up by 300%. That's to say, it's 3 times as high. There's also been a 900 increase in the global use of hashtags on Twitter, encouraging violence against China and Chinese people. And there's been a 200% increase in global sites and hate sites against Chinese people. These are shockingly high rates of growth, but daily we see attacks on Chinese people and China in British media. And this isn't about the virus particularly or Hubei. It's even not just about beating the drums of the Cold War, though these are all factors. These are the terrible effects of what we see on social media and in the streets. So we have to mobilize. We have had a victory defeating Trump, but as you will have all noticed, he refuses to accept that he's lost and is hanging on in the White House. Some American commentators say he'll have to be marched out of the White House by the National Guard. But it does represent a victory to have defeated Trump. We need to recognize the importance and the significance of the Black Lives Matter and the support it has in Britain and internationally. We need to keep an eye just on racism against Black people and Jewish people and people from the Indian subcontinent, but also anti-Chinese racism. So in moving forward for working people around the world, fighting racism, and having a strong, united front against all types of racism will be absolutely key. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Diane. That's brilliant. So now we move to our next speaker, Fabian Figueiredo. Fabian is speaking on opposing the emergence of the new far-right party in Portugal, Fabian is a sociologist and member of the National Secretariat of Bloco de Esquerda. As a student, he was an activist against tuition fees, for the democratization of the unity of the university, and he organized anti-war and anti-NATO demonstrations. Now he researches far-right movements and their international connections, and he is active in the struggle against them. Welcome, Fabian.
Thank you a lot, Kate. Good afternoon to everybody. I would like to start by greeting all of my fellow comrades and speakers, our audience, our interpreters, and Kate Hudson for the invitation and for her very important work that has made our discussion here today possible. As many of you may know, during the 20th century, Portugal lived through 48 years of fascist dictatorship. These dark times came to an end on the 25th of April of 74, and with the revolutionary process that followed it, and that led to the approval of the Portuguese constitution in 76. This document, among many other things, expressly forbid the existence of any type of fascist or racist organization. With the extinction and prohibition of organizations connected to the Estado Novo dictatorship, Portugal didn't have any far-right elect in any type of public office since 74, not in the parliament, not in the regional assemblies, not in the municipalities. Nevertheless, there were always far-right organizations and some episodes of terrorism. During the 70s, far-right militias with strong ties to the dictatorship have orchestrated terrorist attacks, particularly in the north of Portugal, where they were responsible for the assassination of left-wing activists and the arson of the headquarters of several left-wing parties. In the Azores and Madeira regions, these far-right terrorist movements have opposed the democratization process and even defend secessionist ideals. During the 80s and 90s, the neo-Nazi movement has gained strength. They start organizing public demonstrations and murdering people. The neo-Nazis are to blame for the assassination of a black man and a left-wing activist during this period. In 2000, after many attempts, the far-right organized itself in a party named PNR. Despite this, the far-right and the neo-Nazi movement remained a very marginal group with no real political influence. The sector of the party connected to the direct action was constantly being locked up, chased down by the police, and involved with organized crime. On the other hand, the more political sector has successive electoral failures and it's bluntly incapable of attracting the attention of qualified people and of powerful economic groups. Everything starts to change in 2015. Despite the strong memory of the horrors of the fascist dictatorship and of the colonial war, no country is an island. The winds of the neo-radical far-right arrived in Portugal. During the last municipal election, PSD, the main center-right party affiliated in PPE, supported the far-right candidate in the town of Loures, a big and important municipality in the outskirts of Lisbon. The cordon sanitaire against the far-right thus starts to break. With his racist discourse through the campaign, André Ventura managed to get elected councilman in Loures. Shortly after his electoral victory, he leaves PSD, and similarly to the process in Vox, takes with him an important part of the right-wing sectors to his new party, Chega, enough in English. In the parliamentary elections of 2019, André Ventura managed to be elected member of parliament. Shortly after, he declares his intention to run for president in 2021. As it has happened in many other countries, Ventura starts following the strategy similar to Trump's: hate speech, fake news, attacks on black people, immigrants, and Roma, and a generic discourse about corruption. The curious thing is that Chega itself is filled with corruption cases that involve several of its members, including Ventura himself. This actually seems to be a tendency of the far-right parties all through the world. But the question you may ask is, what is Chega made of? Chega is a populist far-right party that has recently adhered to the Identity and Democracy Party, led by Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini, like you know. Simultaneously, Chega has tried to mimetize Bolsonaro's politics, neoliberal agenda, a racist discourse, a great concern with security, a close tie to evangelical churches, and a frequent use of fake news and fake accounts on social media. Its economic agenda of the destruction of the welfare state has managed to attract powerful economic lobbies. Several businessmen and bankers fund Chega. It's yet to be known how this money managed to enter Chega and what were the real motivations of the donors. A while ago, I spoke about the collapse of the first cordon sanitaire. Last week, the second one collapsed as well. PSD signed a deal with Chega to govern the region of Azores. This means the traditional right has officially normalized the Portuguese far right. We can call this the Andalusian moment of the Portuguese right. It seems to be the first rehearsal for future government solutions. For this reason, in Portugal, we have two curves to flatten: the number of people infected with COVID-19 and the growth of the strength and violence of the far right. One is necessarily connected to the other. To conclude, I would like to share with you some lessons we have taken from our struggle against the far right. First, we must not fall in their tricks and traps. We cannot be Pavlov's dog that reacts to every affront directed to us. We ought to set an independent agenda and impose it in the public opinion. Secondly, we need to denounce the contradictions and the consequence of their disastrous political programs. For instance, the Portuguese far right wants to privatize the National Health Service, the NHS. What will be the outcomes of that privatization during the pandemics? Who will profit from it? Unlike what they state, their programs do not stand for the common folks, but for the elite. Thirdly, we ought to investigate and expose the crimes and corruption scandals of the far right. They are always involved in corruption scandals, money laundering, organized crime, and violent groups. The far right represents the worst of our systems. In Portugal, we have been trying to denounce this in the parliament, in the social media, in the streets, and in the press. It is vital that we show that the supposedly anti-system parties are indeed the worst and most rotten part of the system itself. In the fourth place, we need solidarity to fight the pandemics. We must not let the opportunism and negationism of the far right be victorious. We ought to fight those discourses with the struggle for better social support. Due to all of this, we need a strong agenda regarding social rights, refusing cut downs on health, dismissal of workers and demanding aid for everyone. No one can be left behind, has to be our motto. Finally, we need to strongly support all feminist, anti-racist and LGBT movements. Lastly, I would like to leave you with a challenge. The far right has been investing massively in its international relations. Recently, an international far right formation network has been announced by Le Pen, Bolsonaro, Salvini, and the Portuguese André Ventura. If the far right is working together, so must we do the same. I believe this is our biggest challenge, and this is my proposal to all of you. Let's fight the far right together. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much indeed, Fabian. So now moving to our next speaker, Idoia Villanueva, who is a member of the European Parliament from Podemos in Spain. Idoia is international head of the Podemos executive and an MEP in the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. Previously, she was a senator in the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament of Navarra. Welcome, Idoia.
Muchísimas gracias, Kate. Es un placer intervenir entre compañeros y compañeras para poder aportar a un análisis contra uno de los mayores peligros que afrontamos en un ya difícil de por sí 2020. Creo que hoy hablar de extrema derecha es hablar desde un pequeño alivio con esta derrota de Donald Trump, donde la derecha y la ultraderecha se queda sin el mayor referente que ha encabezado, jaleado y siendo el máximo referente, como digo, de esa internacional reaccionaria. Actualmente vengo de Bolivia, ayer llegué de Bolivia, donde también el pueblo boliviano nos ha dado una lección de cómo en 11 meses han sido capaces de levantarse ante un golpe de Estado de la derecha y de la ultraderecha mediante una conciencia social donde se ha unido todo el pueblo y ha demostrado a la comunidad internacional que es posible, mediante la democracia, volver a recuperar el poder. Efectivamente, como decía, la imagen de Trump, la nueva extrema derecha, trata muchas veces de organizaciones políticas que están lideradas por hombres blancos, autoritarios y que muchas veces utilizan la propia crisis de la masculinidad derivada precisamente del auge del feminismo para reforzar políticas misóginas, para reforzar políticas antifeministas. Por otro lado, vemos también que muchas veces ocupan un lugar de privilegio étnico, ¿no? Con una supremacía blanca de Trump, pero que lo podemos ver en Bolsonaro, en Modi en la India, y cómo sus ataques continuados son a población musulmana o Erdogan contra los kurdos, o cómo la extrema derecha lo hace con diferentes colectivos. Vemos también cómo son moralmente reaccionarios, ¿no? Y cómo tiene un programa político que intenta superar la democracia liberal, ¿no? Llevan iniciativas contra el poder judicial, contra el poder legislativo, el ataque a esas estructuras multilaterales que hacen a los pueblos más fuertes. Hemos visto también cómo tienen un programa económico al final radicalmente neoliberal. En todos los países en los que han llegado al gobierno han radicalizado la desprotección social, la desregulación del mercado y el ataque directo a las instituciones del estado de bienestar. Esto lo vemos con la extrema derecha en España, de Vox, donde ante la actual pandemia sigue proponiendo privatizar la sanidad. Y hace 4 días hablaba de que la sanidad pública era una lacra y cuando conseguimos ingresos mínimos vitales habla de paguitas, ¿no? Llevan programas ultraconservadores, como decía, el machismo juega un lugar esencial en la estrategia y representa el cuestionamiento de elementos fundamentales de la sociedad, donde el patriarcado, la familia, una cierta moral religiosa, la heterosexualidad, la identidad de género, juegan unos ejes esenciales, ¿no? Utilizan abiertamente la mentira, la manipulación mediática y hemos visto cómo esto se ha utilizado en diversas campañas a lo largo del mundo. Como bien decía el compañero Fabian, ahora mismo es importante fijarnos en la dimensión internacional de esa extrema derecha, que nosotros solemos llamarla internacional reaccionaria, ¿no? Todos estos grupos y organizaciones trabajan internacionalmente de una manera articulada, política, económica y mediáticamente, ¿no? Mucho más allá, si podemos analizar el tema de las redes sociales, donde juegan un papel importante empresas donde se hacen cuentas a través de bots y donde ha habido pues, un trabajo coordinado, por ejemplo, entre la extrema derecha boliviana, que la ponía antes por ejemplo, con los mismos mensajes intentando atacar tanto a gobiernos de América Latina y en este caso, como vemos, también al gobierno de España. Pero desde el punto de vista de partida, desde este punto de vista de partida, ¿cómo combatimos a la extrema derecha, ¿no? Que es una de las cosas que discutimos hoy. Pues bien, frente a las crisis que estamos viviendo, una crisis social, una crisis económica, una crisis sanitaria, crea miedo e incertidumbre, todavía queda más miedo e incertidumbre en nuestras poblaciones. Y aquí solo caben 2 salidas. Una salida que estamos viendo, que es la que propone la ultraderecha, reaccionaria, que es la del repliegue entre unos pocos, la del repliegue nacional y la de apuntar el penúltimo contra el último de la cadena, y otra salida que es la común, la de ampliar derechos en vez de recordarlos, la de ampliar el estado de bienestar y conseguir esa fraternidad de salida de las sociedades en común. Por eso, en primer lugar, creo que tenemos que incidir en las causas que permiten que en los discursos de extrema derecha calen y ganen votos en poblaciones populares, ¿no? Frente a esa incertidumbre y una desigualdad también creciente, el miedo de una sociedad cada vez más dura, necesitamos políticas públicas fuertes que protejan y den seguridad básica a la población, ¿no? En ese sentido, desde España estamos trabajando en un escudo social para que ante la crisis que estamos viviendo, las poblaciones más populares se sientan fuertes y reforzadas. En segundo lugar, creo que es muy importante combatir la mentira, combatir los discursos de la ultraderecha desde todos los niveles, desde la calle, desde las instituciones, desde las organizaciones sociales, pero creo que es muy importante tomar medidas sobre la posibilidad real de la ciudadanía de estar informados. El derecho, la información es un derecho y es un derecho humano. Cuando la información se convierte en una mercancía, es un producto para vender a unos pocos con unos intereses concretos. Es necesario que tomemos medidas para combatir esas fake news, para combatir esas mentiras y conseguir que la información sea un derecho para la sociedad. Y en tercer lugar, creo que es muy importante organizarnos a nivel internacional, como también decíamos anteriormente, en la defensa de la democracia, en la defensa de los derechos, de la diversidad, de la pluralidad, de la fraternidad. Este fin de semana se ha lanzado, aprovechando la toma de gobierno de Bolivia, un manifiesto a la toma de posesión de Luis Arce en Bolivia, un manifiesto con varios líderes progresistas llamada Declaración de la Paz en defensa precisamente de esa democracia y de intentar interlocutar y crear redes para empujar a nivel internacional aquellas fuerzas que estamos trabajando en cada uno de nuestros países por un mundo que respete la tierra, que respete el clima, que respete la diversidad, que respete los derechos humanos y que trabaje por la justicia social. Así que eso creo que son un poco las claves y encantada de estar participando aquí con todos vosotros y vosotras.
Thanks very much indeed, Idoia. That was fantastic. Now, moving on to our next speaker, it's a pleasure to welcome Urszula Kuczyńska from Fundacja Naprzód in Poland. Urszula is speaking on the ongoing struggle for women's rights in Poland. She's a feminist, political activist, co-organizer of the Black Protest 2016, and a member of Transform in Poland and of Lewica Razem Party. Urszula, over to you. Unmute yourself, Urszula.
Can you hear me now?
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for the introduction. And hello, everybody. I will speak on a slightly different note than the previous speakers, because I am truly bringing you the news from the front line. Today is Polish Independence Day, and today my city, Warsaw, became a war zone. For the last 11 years, we have watched in Poland how the far right hijacked the Polish Independence Day, turning it into a display of violence, hatred, and ugly force. And today, all that violence, hatred, that ugly force that have been honed by the Polish governments out of political calculation, they have erupted in the form of arson, attempts at setting the city council on fire, and regular fights with the police, who resorted to the use of rubber bullets for the first time since I remember. And it happened for a reason. It happened because for the last decade, this force, these totalitarian tendencies in the society, they have not been confronted, they have not been held accountable, they have been encouraged by the Polish authorities, who have cynically been riding the tide of radicalization, pouring the gasoline into the fire. They have been used as a tool to vent public frustration with all the failures of the Polish neoliberal and extremely capitalist state. And this Independence Day comes after 2 weeks of massive protests by Polish women who marched, gathered, and protested despite the pandemic and despite the health risks. And we keep hearing already in the Polish media that the women were violent too, that they sprayed, painted the monuments, they spray painted church walls and pavements. And that is true, but you cannot compare the two. You cannot compare what has been happening for the last 2 weeks and what happened today. Polish women and their friends took to the streets in massive numbers. 4 years after the Black protest that succeeded in stopping for a brief moment the attempt at stripping Polish women from their basic right to health care and dignity when pregnant and in need of an abortion. That's why they took to the streets. The protests were much more widespread and most of all enduring and massive than what we know from 4 years back. On Friday, the 23rd of October, under the pandemic, with so many of us sick and so many of us isolating, almost 1 million people in Poland protested the ruling by what is left from our constitutional tribunal, and who decided to have Polish women forced to carry deformed fetuses and give birth to children that will not survive beyond childhood. And these protests have been happening because we know that this time they are not joking and they have no intention of backing down. They are not playing a game. They want to see us suffer. They want that to satisfy their gods, to cover up for how badly they have dealt with the economic crisis first and with the health crisis still on our hands now. And this time, I can tell you that this war is for real. And this is a war on liberal democracy, on basic human rights, on equality and justice. Now we have religious fanatics from Ordo Iuris who inspired the proposal of a blanket ban on abortion in 2016. They have been listed as an official scientific publishing house. They have infiltrated the government and the ministries. And the fundamentalist activist, Kaja Godek, who stood behind the proposal to ban abortion in the case of fetal abnormalities, she is already raising signatures under a proposal to ban gay prides and speeches on LGBTQ communities' rights and equality. Mr. Kuczyński, the informal head of our government, 2 weeks ago publicly called on Polish nationalists to defend churches against women who went to protest there, to voice their dissent with this dark force behind the Polish politics and the church's impact on Polish public life. Thousands of people answered his call, and the streets of Warsaw became dangerous to peaceful protesters, attacked by groups of nationalist bandits. And today, the very same bandits are marching in the city center. It's looking ugly, and it's not looking good, but the hope is there. And it's in the millions mobilized against what is happening. It's in the younger generation that took massive part in the protests. It's in the hundreds of thousands that went on to organize help and solidarity networks, dragging protesters out of police custody with the help of pro bono lawyers and taking women for abortions abroad during the pandemic when they were refused by the Polish public hospitals. The hope is in the millions who became aware how bad the situation is and that they have been duped and that they have been quiet for far too long. It's 3 years to general parliamentary elections here in Poland. And this time needs to be spent on building grassroots movements and narratives that expose the cruelty and the inefficiency of present politics, the false pretenses of the Polish church and politicians inspired by the bishops. This taboo in my part of Europe, in Poland, has gone down too. And it is for the first time in history that the church's impact on politics and its cruelty has been exposed and pointed a finger at. So many things have been happening here at the same time. It's almost impossible to keep track of all of them. But this is why I am coming to tell you that we need each other more now than ever before, because our democracy here, it has wavered under a push from the far right circles. And they have been growing on a frustration with the politics of austerity, of liberal individualism, of capitalism and corporate logics pushed to an extreme extent. They have been fed by the lack of social solidarity and insecurity. And now it's time to speak up. It's time for all of us in Europe to show and say that we truly are a community of shared values and not just common borders. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Urszula, and solidarity with what you're going through in Poland, and hope you and everyone will try and stay safe in these really difficult circumstances.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Maria Spiliotopoulou from Syriza in Greece. Maria is speaking on the defeat of Golden Dawn, so there are some good news today as well. Maria is a historian and is active in the Athens Social Solidarity Clinic. It's a volunteer clinic that provides healthcare and support to destitute patients, mainly to migrants. Maria.
Ευχαριστώ, Κέιτ. Υπάρχει ελπίδα. Στις 7 Οκτωβρίου, πάνω από 35.000 άνθρωποι περιμέναμε την ανακοίνωση της απόφασης του δικαστηρίου μπροστά στο εφετείο, στην Αθήνα. 5,5 χρόνια δίκης, 7 χρόνια μετά τις δολοφονίες του Παύλου Φίσα και του Σαχζάτ Λουκμάν, 35.000 άνθρωποι, νέοι και μεγαλύτεροι, πολλοί νέοι και πολλοί μεγαλύτεροι, με πολύχρωμες σημαίες και με μάσκες, λίγο πριν τις 12 το μεσημέρι, σταθήκαμε στην απόλυτη σιωπή να αφουγκραστούμε την απόφαση και μόλις ακούστηκε ότι το δικαστήριο καταδίκασε ως εγκληματική οργάνωση τους Ναζί της Χρυσής Αυγής, τους δολοφόνους, τα μέλη των ταγμάτων εφόδου, εκείνους που προσπάθησαν να σκοτώσουν Αιγύπτιους εργάτες και κομμουνιστές συνδικαλιστές, ξεσπάσαμε σε κλάματα, σε δυνατά χειροκροτήματα και συνθήματα. Η Μάγδα Φίσα, η μητέρα του Παύλου, εμβληματική μορφή του αντιφασιστικού αγώνα, βγήκε από την αίθουσα του δικαστηρίου και πανηγύριζε μαζί μας. Η πολιτική αγωγή των θυμάτων πανηγύριζε μαζί μας. Μόνο 1 λεπτό αργότερα, η αστυνομία διέλυσε βία με χημικά, δακρυγόνα, αντλίες νερού και κροτίδες στη συγκέντρωση. Το πλήθος ήταν απίστευτα πυκνό, όμως κανείς δεν ποδοπατήθηκε. Ο αρμόδιος υπουργός ισχυρίστηκε πως είχαν πέσει 150 βόμβες Μολότοφ και γι' αυτό η αστυνομία αντέδρασε. Βίντεο και φωτογραφίες αποδεικνύουν ότι η καταστολή ήταν ανέτεια και προσχεδιασμένη. Οι στιγμές αυτές συμπυκνώνουν το παρελθόν, το παρόν και το μέλλον. Η μεγαλύτερη δίκη Ναζί στην Ευρώπη μετά το 1946 είχε φτάσει στο τέλος της και την κορυφαία στιγμή που αποδόθηκε δικαιοσύνη, η νεοδεξιά αυταρχική διακυβέρνηση επέλεξε να κάνει επίδειξη καταστολής. προσπάθησε και ακόμα προσπαθεί να δυσφημίσει τη δυναμική της συγκέντρωσης, να οικειοποιηθεί την καταδίκη των Ναζί και ξεκίνησε να μιλά για κόκκινη Χρυσή Αυγή που χρειάζεται τάχα να καταδικαστεί. Ωστόσο, η ανάταση, η αισιοδοξία μέσα στο σκοτάδι της πανδημίας και των ακραίων πολιτικών του κράτους έκτακτης ανάγκης δεν χάνεται. Εκείνη η μέρα και οι επόμενες, μέχρι την ανακοίνωση των ποινών, μέχρι τη σύλληψη και τον εγκλισμό των καταδικασμένων, ήταν μέρες αγωνίας, χαράς και ενδυνάμωσης. Το αντιφασιστικό κίνημα, η αριστερά που αγωνίστηκε ενωμένη, που είχε τον πρώτο ρόλο, αλλά και σημαντική μερίδα του ευρύτερου δημοκρατικού τόξου, βρεθήκαμε στη σωστή πλευρά της ιστορίας. 51 εγκληματίες καταδικάστηκαν, σε κάθυρση 13 χρόνων σχεδόν όλα τα μέλη της ηγετικής ομάδας, ο αυτουργός της δολοφονίας του Παύλου Ισόβια. Ο φόβος που προκαλούσαν τα τάγματα εφόδου, οι ρατσιστικές κραυγές μίσους που δηλητηρίαζαν το δημόσιο λόγο έσπασαν και τα θύματα έπαψαν να είναι αόρατα. Η Χρυσή Αυγή έδρασε για 30 χρόνια με θεσμική ανοχή και παρακρατικές διασυνδέσεις, επιδίωξε να κυριαρχήσει στο δρόμο με τη βία και να συντρίψει τους εχθρούς της, αναρχικούς, μετανάστες, αριστερούς, αντιφασίστες. Το πέτυχε σε πολλές περιπτώσεις. Κυρίως σε λαϊκές γειτονιές και στο κέντρο της Αθήνας, έχοντας συγκροτήσει και εκπαιδεύσει πειθαρχημένα τάγματα εφόδου με στρατιωτική δομή, λειτουργώντας με αυστηρή ιεραρχία με βάση την ναζιστική αρχή του ενός, του αρχηγού. Αξιοποίησε τις ακροδεξιές ιδέες που ενδυμούν στην Ελλάδα και εκμεταλλεύτηκε την κατάρρευση του πολιτικού συστήματος με την κρίση του 2010 και την αύξηση των αντιμεταναστευτικών αισθημάτων. Το 12 μπαίνει στη Βουλή με το μανδύα του Κοινοβουλευτικού Κόμματος, επιχειρώντας να πλήξει τη δημοκρατία και με αυτόν τον τρόπο. Το 13 κλιμακώνει τη δράση της με στόχο να προκαλέσει χαμηλής έντασης εμφύλιο και την παρέμβαση παρακρατικών πυρήνων για την κατάλυση της δημοκρατίας. Η στρατηγική της, καθαρά ναζιστική, θα καταλήξει στη δολοφονία εμβληματικών στόχων του νεαρού Πακιστανού εργάτη Λουκμάν και του Παύλου Φίσα, μουσικού αντιφασίστα. Η σύλληψη του αυτουργού της δολοφονίας του Φίσα ήταν η πρώτη σύλληψη δολοφόνου της οργάνωσης επαυτοφόρο από την αστυνομία. Ακολούθησε παλαϊκός ξεσηκωμός και οι συλλήψεις ηγεσίας και μελών. Στη διάρκεια της δίκης ο φόβος έσπασε. Κατέθεσαν τα θύματα που επέζησαν, οι σύντροφοί τους, κατέθεσαν διανοούμενοι και πολιτικά πρόσωπα. Οι ρατσιστικές επιθέσεις καταγγέλλονται και δημοσιοποιούνται σε μεγάλο ποσοστό, ενώ είναι σαφώς μικρότερης έκτασης. Τα γραφεία της οργάνωσης έκλεισαν παντού. Το 19 δεν εξέλεξε βουλευτές στην Ελληνική Βουλή και τώρα έχει ουσιαστικά διαλυθεί. Δημοσιογράφοι ερευνητές ανέδειξαν τα πραγματικά γεγονότα και κάλυψαν τη δίκη. Η πολιτική αγωγή, χωρίς να έχει οικονομική στήριξη, χρησιμοποίησε κάθε τρόπο για να θεμελιώσει τον εγκληματικό της χαρακτήρα. Υπήρξε έμπρακτη αλληλεγγύη και στήριξη από την ελληνική, την ευρωπαϊκή αλλά και τη διεθνή αριστερά, από κόμματα κοινοβουλευτικά και εξοκοινοβουλευτικά, οργανώσεις και συλλογικότητες, μέσα και έξω από το δικαστήριο. Με τη δικαστική απόφαση, η εγκληματική δράση της Χρυσής Αυγής αντιμετωπίστηκε αποτελεσματικά από την οργανωμένη πολιτεία. Η καταδίκη αποτελεί παρακαταθήκη επίπονου, συστηματικού και μακρύ αγώνα. Τώρα που ο υπαρχηγός της οργάνωσης διαφεύγει και ο καταδικασμένος ευρωβουλευτής της κρύβεται στις Βρυξέλλες, τώρα που ξεκίνησε η δίκη των δολοφόνων του ΛΟΑΤΚΙ ακτιβιστή Ζάκη Κωστόπουλου, που λιντσάρισαν μέρα μεσημέρι φασιστοειδή μαζί με αστυνομικούς στο κέντρο της Αθήνας, και τώρα που διερευνώνται παλαιότερες επιθέσεις των ταγμάτων εφόδου ή μεμονωμένων Ναζί, τα απομεινάρια της οργάνωσης προσπαθούν να επενδύσουν στο φόβο του κορονοϊού και στις θεωρίες συνωμοσίας, όπως παντού στην Ευρώπη, οι ακροδεξιά και οι νεοφασίστες. Η δύναμη της συγκέντρωσης έξω από το εφετείο, η δυναμική της δίκης και της δικαστικής απόφασης δεν επιτρέπουν να εφησυχάζουμε και είναι η αριστερά που κρατά και διευρύνει το αντιφασιστικό μέτωπο και τα δίκτυα αλληλεγγύης χωρίς αποκλεισμούς στην Ελλάδα και όπως είδαμε και σήμερα στην Ευρώπη. Τις ημέρες της πανδημίας, την κάθε μέρα, χρειάζεται να δρούμε σε κάθε επίπεδο ενάντια στην κυβερνητική καταστολή, να παραμένουμε με έμπρακτο τρόπο δίπλα στους πρόσφυγες, αλλά και στους νέους που προσπαθεί να προσεγγίσει η ακροδεξιά, να μελετάμε και να αναδεικνύουμε τα χαρακτηριστικά του ακροδεξιού φαινομένου, να μην διστάζουμε να προσφεύγουμε στα δικαστήρια και να καταγγέλουμε τους ακροδεξιούς πυρήνες στους κρατικούς μηχανισμούς. Οι πολιτικές λιτότητας και η διαρκής φτωχοποίηση που ενισχύουν την ακροδεξιά, την Ισλαμοφοβία και τον ρατσισμό, να μην γίνουν η νέα κανονικότητα. Σας ευχαριστώ.
Thanks very much indeed, Maria. That was great. And solidarity with all the struggles going on in Greece, and particularly for your work in the Solidarity Clinic. I'm part of the Greece Solidarity campaign in Britain, and we raise money for the social solidarity clinics and the important work that you do. Our next speaker, before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to remind the audience, please do send questions in. You can either put the questions in chat or you can send them in via the Q&A box, but please do. We have some coming in, but it would be good to have a really wide-ranging discussion. So, to our next speaker, Rafael Morales Dominguez is going to speak to us on the struggle against the far right in Spain in the COVID context. Rafael is president of the Socio-Cultural Association La Desbanda. He is a trade unionist in the Anarcho-Syndicalist Union CGT, and above all, he says he is a social activist for more than 40 years. So, welcome, Rafael.
Muy buenas tardes a todos los compañeros y compañeras en la lucha antifascista en el espacio europeo. Quiero dar también, por supuesto, las gracias a la organización de este foro por haberme permitido dirigirme a vosotros desde nuestra asociación, la Desbanda. Asociación que, bueno, quizás voy a cambiar un poco el discurso, ya que lo mío es trabajo del día a día, haciendo memoria, trabajando por la memoria, pero trabajando por la memoria de, bueno, de este genocidio, del mayor genocidio cometido a la población civil en el Estado español. Como sabéis, ya se anunciaba, soy el presidente de la asociación La Desbanda, y La Desbanda es como se denominó allá en febrero del 37, cómo tuvo que salir por la única puerta que el fascismo, que las tropas fascistas, golpistas, alemanas por el aire, italianas también, y por tierra, un cuerpo de ejército italiano vino a experimentar todo su equipo, digamos, de guerra, y lo hizo precisamente persiguiendo a más de 190.000 personas, fundamentalmente, y más del 80% civiles, niños, ancianos y mujeres. Tuvieron que salir huyendo desde Málaga, donde había refugiados, entre 190 y 300.000 personas estaban entonces en Málaga, y tuvieron que salir el 7 de febrero porque el 8 ya fue ocupada por los fascistas Málaga. Bien, en eso nosotros como asociación, nuestro trabajo y nuestra lucha es eso: primero, sacar del olvido ese genocidio donde fueron masacradas, donde fueron asesinadas más de 5.000 personas. 5.000 personas y heridos, pues ni se sabe. Total, fue realmente una gran masacre. Planificada y llevada a efecto por el gobierno, o sea, por los fascistas, golpistas, tanto españoles como ayudados por el nazismo y el fascismo italiano. De ahí que nosotros, uno de los objetivos fundamentales sea hoy llevar a la población, en principio social, a la población civil española, este hecho que no se conoce, que no es conocido y que todavía tenemos que seguir pues, expandiendo el conocimiento de esta masacre. Y por supuesto también queremos llevarlo hasta Europa. Creo que fue muy fuerte, que no se conoce y que tenemos que reivindicar, tenemos que seguir exigiendo verdad, justicia y reparación sobre este hecho ocurrido, sobre esta masacre ocurrida en febrero de 1937. Y nosotros, dentro del fascismo o contra el fascismo, ¿qué estamos haciendo? Efectivamente, hoy nosotros cada vez que hacemos las marchas que estamos haciendo desde hace ya 5 años, desde Málaga a Almería, durante 12 días, andamos la carretera de la muerte, como ya llamó Norman Bethune, lo recorremos esa carretera más de 2000 personas para seguir homenajeando a todas esas miles de víctimas que cayeron en esa carretera, para seguir, como decía antes, sacar del olvido todo este genocidio. Y a la vez queremos exigir verdad, justicia y reparación. O sea, no solo nos quedamos para recorrer esta carretera todos los años, sino lo que queremos es exigir esa verdad. De tal manera que el fascismo, o sea, la ultraderecha, la extrema derecha de este país, aún hacen negacionismo de este hecho, para lo cual los testimonios de los pocos supervivientes que ya quedan dan fe realmente de qué ocurrió, cómo vivieron, qué pasó en la carretera de la muerte. Y efectivamente nosotros en nuestra lucha la vemos que hoy más importante que nunca, porque el avance de la ultraderecha, el avance de la extrema derecha nos está haciendo ver que no podemos dejar ni un hueco más a que esta ultraderecha con sus mentiras, con sus negacionismos, siga imponiéndose, siga en esta España el franquismo con toda su impunidad, a pesar de las leyes de memoria que todavía, o sea, que están en vigor. Ahora se está elaborando una nueva que parece ser con más fuerza, pero siguen en lo que es la ultraderecha, lo que siguen los fascismos en España, pues campando a sus anchas. Por tanto, ahí estamos nosotros en esa lucha hoy para sacar, por supuesto, y para enfrentarnos a toda esa, bueno, pues a lo que es el fascismo en España hoy. Y nosotros, como decía, estamos trabajando en varios frentes. Uno de ellos, como ya digo, es homenajeando a esas víctimas, haciendo la carretera año tras año durante el mes de febrero, pero también estamos trabajando buscando la verdad y para llegar, para exigir la justicia y la reparación de esas miles de víctimas. ¿Y qué estamos haciendo? Bueno, pues acabamos de realizar el primer congreso, el primer encuentro internacional de la desbandada. ¿Qué queríamos nosotros poner sobre la mesa? Queríamos poner el estado de la cuestión de qué pasó con esta masacre, con este genocidio. ¿Qué sabemos de él? Pero además también hemos desarrollado varias mesas y una de ellas es la lucha antifascista hoy, para lo cual han venido pues, de Europa, personas de España, donde nos han expuesto por dónde tenemos que caminar para seguir la lucha antifascista. También hemos tenido otras mesas con lo que son los exilios actuales, lo que supone lo que es todos los exilios pues, desde Siria, bueno, pues todo lo que ha sido todo el Magreb, la inmigración, las migraciones, etcétera, que también tenemos que luchar para que no siga ocurriendo todos esos hechos de exilios actuales que todavía existen. Por tanto, nosotros, nuestra lucha va concretamente en esa dirección. Pero además también tenemos otra tercera, diríamos, otro tercer objetivo, que es precisamente también llevar este conocimiento de la verdad del hecho en sí, o sea, del hecho de la desbandada, lo queremos llevar a las aulas, para lo cual también estamos haciendo investigación, recogiendo documentación para elaborar una guía didáctica que llegue a las aulas de este país, a los jóvenes, los cuales se les está manipulando de una manera feroz desde la ultraderecha, porque efectivamente aquí en este país los jóvenes no saben la historia, no conocen nuestra historia, nuestro pasado, el franquismo, no conocen la república, no conocen nada, porque siempre se ha obviado el tema del trabajo de historia en lo que es ya la última época, desde la guerra civil hasta el día de hoy. Por tanto, tenemos que hacer un esfuerzo para llevar esa guía didáctica a esos centros para que nuestros jóvenes conozcan la historia. Para concluir, quería leer pues, unos párrafos de la declaración final del primer encuentro que hemos llevado a cabo en Almería el último fin de semana. Lo digo porque efectivamente, pues bueno, creo que ilustra cuáles son nuestro trabajo, cuáles son nuestros objetivos y nuestra lucha. Y digo, compromiso de Vícar, declaración final del primer encuentro internacional Desbanda 2020 y por supuesto, no lo he comentado antes, con este encuentro que ponemos en marcha es ya un congreso, el primer congreso internacional sobre la desbandada y un siglo de luchas populares antifascistas. Y decimos en la declaración final que acabamos de hacer, el antifascismo constituye en teoría uno de los valores fundacionales de la Unión Europea. No obstante, uno de sus estados se resiste ahora y siempre a su asunción real. El Reino de España, cuya jefatura de Estado son los sucesores del dictador genocida Francisco Franco, a título de rey, se resiste a aceptar...
You've had 8 minutes,
sí, bien, ya termino. Se resiste tanto a los principios de la Unión Europea como el derecho internacional. Y acabamos diciendo, 83 años después, tras 42 años de supuesta democracia en nuestro país, aún no se reconoce el genocidio. La apología del mismo y la impunidad de sus crímenes son aceptados sin problema. El Ayuntamiento de Madrid puede reírse de la memoria democrática retirando nombres de calles de representantes públicos republicanos, destruyendo placas y memoriales a los luchadores por la libertad, a las víctimas del franquismo, sin que ello suponga consecuencia alguna. Por tanto, seguimos en la lucha. He leído solamente unos párrafos, pero que es cierto, estamos con vosotros y seguiremos trabajando, en este caso, nosotros desde la memoria. Gracias, muchas gracias por haberme permitido dirigirme a vosotros.
Thanks very much indeed, Rafael, and it was really interesting and an honor for me to attend your commemoration event of La Desbanda last weekend, so thank you for including me in that. Our last speaker is Ulrich Schneider on the situation in Germany. Ulrich is a leading member of the German Association of the Persecuted of the Nazi Regime, Association of Anti-Fascists, and he's Secretary General of the International Federation of Resistance Fighters. He has written extensively on this subject. Ulrich, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kate, for giving me the floor. Thank you to all intervention until now. It was very interesting for me. And now I will give another impression of the right-wing development, especially the situation in Germany. I will give it in a quite briefly interpretation. We can see, especially in Germany, that right-wing groups infiltrate the civil movement of Corona doubters. It's for sure not all skeptics are right-wing. Nevertheless, we have the problematic experience that the skeptics accept right-wing groups, representatives of conspiracy theory and anti-Semitic position in their protest activities without any critical comment. I will give some example. In these marches, the extreme right is increasingly taken on a coordinating and organizing function. In Lower Saxony, the local functionary of the party, the right, provided the public address system at the rally called by a liberal politician. In addition, the neo-fascists were able to speak at the manifestation without contradiction. This is a strategic line of the extreme right in Germany. They call it support the popular protest against the corona dictatorship, so they call it. We must use the opportunity and not just accompany the protest as onlookers, but set our own accents and content. Logically, in Dortmund, the center of the right, a bigger militant group took part in a forbidden action whereby a right-wing activist has been arrested for violence against a journalist. Last week, in Leipzig, Saxony, about 20,000 people demonstrated without paying attention to the police. When the police officially stopped the manifestation and marching, street fights between the police and neo-fascist hooligans and violent corona skeptics took place, and the police opened the street for the fascist groups. In another part of Saxony, a representative of the neo-fascist NPD called for a rally under the slogan "Through barriers." The slogans have been resistance, mask off, and we are the people, they called in November of 1989. In Bavaria, organized groups of the extreme right took part in the civil protest actions. When the police spoke of several interested groups that had apparently infiltrated the demonstration, the local Antifa declared, the creme de la creme of the regional neo-Nazi scene was gathering there. The small neo-Nazi party, the Third Way, is already dreaming of a glorious future. As they told, for the first time there seemed to be a readiness of civil obedience among the people to a greater extent. The basis of the system is crumbling. Fewer and fewer people are still willing to let the establishment make any rules for them. Trust in the government and the entire political system is dwindling. So the neo-Nazi. This seems to be the fascist group a welcome development. Right-wing groups explain, not quite right the word, the pandemic by racist theories. One topic is the migration and or the migrants. They should be responsible for the distribution of COVID-19. Every time when we have corona hotspots in a camp of refugees because of the problematic hygienical situation and or after big wedding ceremonies in migrant families living in Germany, right-wing propaganda shouts, there one can see that migrants are the problem. Popular for the extreme right-wing ideology in Germany is also the combination of anti-Semitic attempts with corona doubts. Bill Gates, George Soros, and all the financial powers of the East Coast, what is a synonym of fascist ideology for Jewish bankers, are responsible because they take profit from the situation. Such abstruse theories are not only communicated in social networks like Facebook, Twitter at all, but also in public events and speeches during mass meetings against corona restrictions. Racism and conspiracy theory one can find not only by corona doubters as well as in the ranks of the neo-fascist party Alternative for Germany, AfD, the biggest opposition party in German Bundestag, which supports the mass meetings and skeptics and denies the danger of the pandemic situation. Although it is an authoritarian party, a neoliberal authoritarian party, it claims with the slogan, "Stop Corona Dictatorship," to defend one's liberty against the restrictions which the government decided because of pandemic situation. For example, a Saxony representative of AfD were arrested by the police for violation of the Saxon corona protection rules. In addition, they never forget the slogan, "Merkel muss weg" or "Merkel has to go." So they combine anti-corona restriction demonstration with their protest against the government. Political resistance against these extreme right attempts is not easy today in Germany. maybe in other countries too. The anti-fascist and anti-racist movement in Germany, for example, Stand Up Against Racism, wide active group. Black Lives Matter, also in our country active. And of course, my own organization, VVN-BDA, gives the political answer by public protests, confronting the corona doubters with Transparency and others, blocking their events at all. Although we are, with our protests, our political activities have the 2 days result that media and the public meaning is more and more distanced to such right-wing attempts and to acceptance on extreme right position in such manifestation. I think the meeting today is a good and important exchange of experiences and very helpful for all of us. Because in several countries, we are confronted with the same situation. That's why I would like to make, at the end of my intervention, a proposal for a step. It could be helpful if the European Forum find a common statement to this political development, right wings on corona skeptic demonstration, as we see it in Spain, in Italy, and of course in Germany. So everybody who tries to resist knows he and or she is part of a European movement against such extreme right attempts. Thank you for audience.
Thanks very much indeed for that. That was very interesting. Right, now we have some time for your questions. So we've got quite a few now coming in. So rather than have all the there's a couple at the end I want to put to all speakers, which are about the way forward, things we can do and organise and so on. But there are some others prior to that, but I don't want everyone to answer each question. So I'm going to read it out and then ask speakers just to, if you want to speak on this, please do say. So the first one is from Lambis Kontonis. I think he's a Syriza MEP from the GUI NGL group. He says, the extreme right has been incorporated in the conservative parties, both in EPP and ECR, which I think are European parliamentary groups. They are also part of some governments of EU member states, directly influencing council decisions. So today, they have a word in EU decisions. This is a historic mistake by the Conservatives, who do not have firm red lines to the extreme right. However, as the left, we have to reevaluate our policies towards parts of society that are lured by ultra-right parties. Why do you think significant parts of society, including workers who are suffering from austerity and are marginalised, go to the ultra-right and not to the left and progressive forces? I mean, that's one of the big questions for us all that we're facing. So would any speaker like to approach that question? Yeah, Urszula, unmute.
Gee, how do I do that?
That's it, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's just from the observation, because this is what has been going on for a decade now in Poland. The thing is that they offer easy solutions to complex questions and to complex issues. And people will want to have easy answers, because this is something you can, it's something easy to believe in. While, and always a narrative, that doesn't put any demands on yourself, on you to do things, is going to be more acceptable and more readily accepted by people than like a deeper reflection on systemic changes that must be implemented and things. So The thing is that we need leftist populism. We need to start offering true but easy answers to complex problems. Of course, we are great as the left at nuancing problems and understanding their complexity and offering solutions. But this is not what in today's media and in today's reality, people are prone to do, yeah? People search for easy answers and people search for groups they can identify with. And they are searching for easy identities. And this is exactly what ultra-right groups offer. This is my observation coming here from Poland, where the church is still very much the center of social life in so many places. This is what they offer. They offer inclusiveness. They offer, easiness of identification, and they offer easy answers to very complex questions. And of course, they are false, and we know that. But that's something that's really easy for people, to catch on and to go forward with.
Thanks very much, Urszula. Fabian, were you indicating there? No?
No,
okay.
I wasn't.
Okay.
I subscribe what Urszula said.
Okay, Idoia, over to you.
Muchas gracias. Yo creo que la pregunta en sí mismo lleva una reflexión que es muy importante, ¿no? Que decía cómo, bueno, las fuerzas conservadoras han permitido a la ultraderecha llegar a gobiernos, ¿no? Y que tengan voz y que tengan capacidad de influencia en las decisiones que se toman dentro de la Unión Europea. Creo que esto es muy importante, la importancia que tiene la de poner un cordón de las fuerzas democráticas a estas fuerzas de ultraderecha que directamente no respetan las reglas básicas y fundamentales de democracia y de derechos humanos. Y en eso nos tienen que encontrar unidos y unidas, porque muchas veces para atacar a las fuerzas progresistas o de izquierdas se les ha dejado o se les ha alentado y luego el monstruo se ha comido, ¿no? A las fuerzas que han permitido, que han alentado estos discursos. Por otro lado, respecto a lo que decía de por qué muchas veces encuentran respuesta en la ultraderecha y no tanto en la izquierda. Creo que aquí es muy importante el fenómeno de la antipolítica, ¿no? Cuando se está potenciando que todos somos iguales, todas somos iguales, y hay un fenómeno de antipolítica y hay una respuesta de alguna manera de personas que son outsiders, ¿no? Por otro lado, tienen muy bien identificado el enemigo, es decir, frente al desasosiego, la incertidumbre, el miedo, identifican muy bien quién es su enemigo, ¿no? Y el enemigo siempre, como decía, es poner a luchar al penúltimo de la cadena contra el último, ¿no? En este caso es el feminismo, son los migrantes, son las personas más desfavorecidas. Sin embargo, la respuesta de las izquierdas pues nos cuesta más señalar únicamente quién es, ¿no?, nuestro enemigo, quién es el culpable. Hablamos de las políticas neoliberales en general, hablamos de ese sistema capitalista en general, pero nos cuesta más identificar a los que de verdad están ganando con estas crisis, sus crisis, ¿no? En España en su momento hablamos de la casta como concepto, pero creo que a la izquierda nos falta identificar claramente quién son los enemigos de las clases populares que hacen que crezca esa desigualdad. Y por último, como bien decía también la compañera, ¿no?, hay respuestas fáciles y sencillas dentro de identificar ese enemigo común, como decía, que hace construir identidad propia y sentirse formar parte de un grupo, ¿no?
Thanks very much indeed, Idoia. We're now going to move on to the next question, which comes from Piera. This is about the use of legal methods. And she says, we know that many far-right actions are against the law in terms of assassinations of Antifa comrades, LGBTQ activists, corruption, money laundering, and so on, has been said. We could undertake then, together with activism, perhaps some judicial actions against these crimes. Unfortunately, we know also, due to sad images of the assassination of George Floyd, for example, that the police has a certain tendency towards discrimination and the far right, apart some victories such as the one of Golden Dawn. How can we deal with this? Would it be also through judicial actions to bring justice and maybe change institutions as well? Or which other actions to make changes at institutional level? In Italy, for instance, where the fascist apparatus is somehow still there. So how can we use judicial methods, and how can we really bring about institutional change? So which speaker would like to start talking about that? Fabian and then Maria. Fabian.
Yeah, so I think we need to take legal actions against the far right when we investigate them, when they are attacked and so on. And we know that many times it's not easy. The situation in Portugal is not like in Italy, and I'm very glad for that. And I hope that we in Italy will also have more strength to fight the far right. But for example, in Portugal, we have a big problem with the infiltration of far right activists within the police. And there are even activists, international organizations that said Portugal has a racist problem in the police, and that is happening across all the world. We see in many countries that there are many far-right activists infiltrated in the police, and that is in fact a problem when we get to the institution and when we say, okay, we need to investigate the far right and the police needs to do their work. Yeah, so it's not easy, but we need to fight for a fair, anti-racist, anti-fascist police. So we need to demand that the states protect the LGBTs, the black activists, and all those who the far right attacks. And that is also a part of our anti-fascist activism, to expose the fascists and the neo-Nazis that are within the police. For example, that is a big, it's a big thing in Portugal that we debate a lot. The problem that, like it happened in Greece and in other countries, that we know that the main activists from the neo-Nazis group are within the police, and that is a big problem. On the other hand, it's to demand that those crimes are investigated. And for that, many times, we need to do our own investigation, and we need to make within our activism to find who founds the far right, how does the far right organize itself, how do the international networks of the far right work? Are there American millionaires funding the European far right? Yes, we know there is dark money coming for other countries to fund the far right organization in our countries. And we need to do that work and expose it in the press so that we can demand that the justice in our country does their job. And on the other hand, so just to finish, the social, like we saw in Greece, for example, the social mobilization is very important that we achieve justice for all the victims.
Thanks very much. Maria and then Ulrich, and then we'll move on to the next question. So Maria, over to you.
I totally agree with Fabian, and I would like also to add that all policemen are not fascists. So we also have to approach policemen to have people inside the security forces who can encourage other people there who used to be afraid of the far right and also of Golden Dawn, or who are still afraid, to not be afraid and to act in a democratic way. And also we should empower the judges. This trial of the Golden Dawn shows us that there are judges who can fight the far right, but they need encouragement. They need to feel that the society is going along with them. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Maria. Ulrich, over to you.
Yes, some addition on this from the German perspective. We have in Germany the same situation that inside of the police and the security system, right-wing and extreme right position are real infiltrated. As I talked about the Leipzig demonstration last weekend, we have the experience that the police tried to stop the violent right-wing groups, but they resigned and they gave the floor to them. In the evening, when the fascists have left Leipzig, the police was very active in a part of the city against the left protesters. There they used the police power and they showed what they can do if they want. And so we see it is not the police, it is a police leading structure, and it's the politics what say how the police have to react. And we have this next experience that we say inside of the police we have something like institutional racism. For example, the police is controlling migrants once again. But they control people, they look like migrants also. And so the question was how the police is will be trained, how will be learn lesson not to do this, but the politicians are stopping all the activities in that direction to support the democratic aspects of the police. And that is what we as left must realize from the reaction of the police. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Right, going on to our next question. This is from Andrew Bergin. And this is a question about how we build international cooperation and solidarity, because clearly this is a problem that is affecting most places. So he says, there have been good signs of the fight back against the far right in Poland, the US and Greece. What do the panelists think our next steps should be in building international unity against the far right? So who would like to answer first on that one? How do we build international unity and cooperation? Urszula, unmute.
I volunteered, seeing the hesitance, but I think I'm going to say something really obvious. We organize internationally the way we organize nationally. And everything that you have just said about judiciary, for instance, and about role of the police, let's not forget that we do have international institutions that are, in a way, involved in application of the rules and policies and politics. So the thing is how to have those institutions informed and how to have those institutions exert like real impact on lower and on national levels. I am talking about European, like EU institutions, obviously, but not only those. Yeah, this is something that that I have briefly mentioned at the very end of my speech. This is the time where we need to walk the talk and start seeing EU as this community of values, trying, to help each and every member state, boost those values and apply by the rules if they somehow fail or waver down the road. So I would say that the answer is very simple on like theoretical level, but it's really complex in practical terms, because very often, like EU institutions have absolutely no impact or no influence and no say in national matters, because still a lot of power is exactly in the national states, right? So I would say that we know we know how it should be done. We need to find the answer on how to really do it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Urszula. Anyone else like to respond? Okay, Ulrich, and then I'll throw in a comment.
Yes, I'm not sure if we need a new network, because there existing several networks, quite good working. For example, long time ago, we created the United, a network of civil society movements all over Europe, and it is active in remembrance and activities against racism. We have ENA, European Network Against Racism, a structure that has been created by members of the European Parliament and now together with other structures integrated. Of course, our organization FIR, the banner I have behind of me, is an international network, a network of veteran and anti-fascist organization in Europe. So there exist structures, and also the Rise Against Racism. It is a network what is in the center in Great Britain, but in other countries also with activists. We need to support such networks and not to create a new one. Of course, we need to go together, but we need to go together in that structure they still exist.
Thanks very much, Ulrich. Yes, so I just want to give a little mention to an initiative that's coming up next March, hosted by the European Left and Die Linke, which is the second No Pasarán conference about fighting the far right, exactly what we've been talking about, but not in any way forming some new network or organization, but drawing together people who fight the far right and fight racism in every different way, whether it's politicians, whether it's street activists, grassroots organization, migrant support, LGBTQ comrades, fighting against oppression, women defending their rights, and so on. We're going to bring all those different elements together to discuss how we can be more effective. And that is taking place in Berlin on the weekend of the 13th and 14th of March. And plans are already underway. It will be a hybrid event, so it will be in person for those people who are able to go in person, and it will also be online. So there will be opportunities for everyone. It will be an inclusive and diverse event. So please do put that in your diaries. We had the first No Pasarán conference in London last year, and we had hundreds of people there, and many came to London from Europe, and we were able to support travel and subsistence and so on to ensure that we had that really inclusive discussion. So please do look out for more details about that, and we will be able to share them. So I've got just a few more questions. I've got one that I'll put for you to indicate if you want to respond, and then I'm going to put a couple more to you all to round up our session. So Melody, she says, thank you very much to everyone for your enlightening interventions. On the topic of the far right and conspiracy theorists, how do you think we can fight them on the internet, and especially on social media, where they seem to have an open platform to propagate their ideas and theories? We need to find a way to counteract their waves of posts, giving, like Ms. Kuczyńska said, easy answers to complex problems. So, question about the internet and far right ideas being kind of bombarding us. Who would like to go first on that one? Urszula, unmute.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think that it's good to see that we all seem to be on the same page, and that we all seem to have realized the massive role that social media plays in distributing, the narratives by the far right. And I think that this question is kind of secondary, or is directly linked and cannot be answering why, facing, and talking about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that social media platforms are entities within themselves, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and they have been left unregulated and not held accountable for, the narratives that they have been distributing for far too long. We've seen Cambridge Analytica scandal happen, without actually having seen Facebook, Twitter, and other platforms held to account. Yes, so this is one of the things that should be top priorities for EU institutions, because here the national states, they have little bargaining power trying to regulate Facebook or trying to regulate YouTube and have them do something about the algorithms that have us enclosed within our information bubbles, and actually like separating us from like the news streams, right? But this is something that I think the EU as a structure needs to confront and needs to deal with, because this is something that neither the activists alone nor national states alone will be able to actually face and effectively, confront with and fight with. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. Anyone else like to respond on that? Any ideas? Yeah, Idoia, and then we'll move to the final questions. Idoia?
No sé quién has dado paso, si me has dado paso a mí, que... vale. Gracias, disculpar, no había oído el nombre. Totalmente de acuerdo con lo que decía Úrsula, ¿no? Yo creo que nos falta parte de regulación para poder atajar todos estos bulos y fake news en las redes, pero sobre todo lo que nos falta es querer e interés, ¿no? Porque hay que sortear, es un tema que es sensible, donde es necesario y hay que equilibrar sobre la libertad de expresión que es necesaria en redes y donde nunca jamás podemos atacarla o menguarla. Pero hay una realidad, y es que en redes sociales en concreto podríamos, yo creo que separarlo en dos. Uno, los grandes tenedores de los medios de comunicación, es decir, cuando la información se ha vuelto mercancía, han entrado intereses capitalistas en el control de esos medios, donde habría que regularlos. Quienes pueden entrar a ser dueños de los grandes medios de comunicación, porque evidentemente lo hacen con unos intereses concretos y no con el hecho de dar información, y ahí habría que atajar. Y por otro lado, en las redes sociales hay múltiples iniciativas donde nos han puesto al descubierto cómo hay empresas detrás que directamente crean perfiles falsos para distribuir en masa múltiples mentiras y fake news. Eso en concreto es algo que no es contra la libertad de expresión, sino que es una manipulación concreta y que se puede descubrir, y en la que habría también que las instituciones atacar a ese tipo de empresas que crean perfiles falsos para hacer una masiva difusión de mentiras que se han relevado, ¿no? En este caso concreto me gustaría recomendaros, por ejemplo, Pandemia Digital, que está tanto en Internet como en Telegram, que creo que están haciendo una labor magnífica en desenmascarar muchas de las redes que actualmente está utilizando la ultraderecha y señalar quiénes están detrás. Ahora hace falta que también desde las instituciones seamos capaces de regular este desinformación que están sufriendo los ciudadanos y las ciudadanas.
Thanks very much indeed. Okay, so there are two final questions. I'm going to read them both out, and then I'm going to ask each of you panelists to say a few words in response to these questions, okay? And then everyone will be free to go. So first of all, a question from Liliana. She says, the far right is fighting the pandemic with racism and by getting more and more together and close to governments and citizens. Trying to answer the challenge made by Fabian, how can left forces work and act more together to fight this situation? Can you present some proposals? So I'm looking to you for some practical proposals and suggestions. And then from Ruben, he says, what do you think we normal people, some workers, other students, can do to actively fight the extreme right and fascism within our countries? So really action-oriented questions. And I'm going to come to you in the reverse order of which you spoke. So Ulrich, you'll know that that means I'm coming to you first. Over to you.
Yes, thanks. How can normal people react on it? I think normal people can react, not by organizing big meetings, but also by stopping the pandemic doubts and skeptics, and also by stopping racist attempts. In Germany, we have activities, the so-called Stammtischkämpfer. This is a German word. Stammtisch, it's a place in the in the restaurant where you can drink beer, and normally you are talking there as you think after some beer, and so you need to stop those people. They say all the migrants are responsible for all the bad things in our country. All the people, all the right are supported, and so we try to help everybody in the trade unions, also in social groups. In groups, they are connected with churches to make them strengthen them to give answer against such easy right answers by our answers. As Urszula said, we need to find easy answer, but not wrong answer in that situation. And so I think it is possible to act if we are supporting the civil society and all the members of the civil society to show their face, to make it clear that they want to stop. And we, as left organization and anti-fascist organization, should support this process. We should support, give them support to find right words. Full stop.
Thanks very much. Do we have Rafael still with us? Can't see him just now, so we can come back to him if we see him rejoining. So Maria, now over to you.
Sorry. Here in Greece, the people who deny Corona, I wanted to point out, mostly use, they are of the far right, but they also are extreme nationalists, and also they belong to part of the official church. So in order to fight them, or for someone to do something, I think it is good to join a solidarity network or create one among the friends or in a neighborhood to support migrants, to support destitute people, to support homeless, to give food, to support the school children who have trouble in their schoolwork, so that less people feel excluded, and less people feel that they are left unsupported, and less people turn to the far right. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Maria. Urszula, your thoughts?
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for choosing these questions, because I think that they are intertwined, and that I'll be able to shoot two birds with one stone, giving you an advice of a feminist, something that feminists all over the world, not only Europe, keep repeating, that in order to fight with sexism and patriarchy, you need to have allies, and you need to have people speak up, even in the most mundane situations. Yeah, when you hear a sexist joke and you're a man, then you say, hey, that's not funny. Yeah, and that this is how normal people need to be reacting to this racist narrative, distributed by rightist and far rightist governments. We need to understand that now is not the time to be, the smart guy that's standing there and saying, okay, so he's right, but you're also right, so let's meet somewhere in the middle. This is no longer the time where we can meet in the middle, because there is no symmetry between the far right and the furthest of the lefts. Yeah, this is the time when we need to convince ourselves and other people that even if they do not have time for activism, for getting involved politically, then they can do their part by simply saying that, no, this is not funny. No, this is not how it goes. No, this joke is not funny. And please don't let them fool you by putting the blame on people who have nothing to do with the situation, but just let you forget that this is the governments that screwed up their response to the historically, incumbent and massive health and economic crisis that we are having on our hands. So now is the time for us, to have people realize, also our friends, that this is no longer the time when you can be neutral, and when being neutral, and standing in the middle was the synonym of being someone wise. Yeah, that this is the time to react even to the smallest of things that you hear around you, like conspiracy theories surrounding Corona, or the fact that it's migrants are to blame, or LGBTQ people, or women protesting in the streets of Warsaw that are blamed for the Corona crisis right now, right? So now is simply the time to to say out loud that this is the time to reject this false symmetry, yeah, and take sides. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Urszula. A very important message there. Idoia, your turn. No? Hang on a minute, let me just look at my list. Yes? Is it Idoia?
No había pedido palabra, creo que estoy hablando bastante entre los compañeros y las compañeras, pero me parece fundamental, ¿no?, lo que señalaba también la compañera Úrsula ahora. Creo que no es momento de medias tintas, creo que es un momento en el que el cordón sanitario a la ultraderecha es necesario ponerlo desde todos los frentes. Y ahí tenemos una responsabilidad todas las personas, tenemos una responsabilidad cada ciudadano y cada ciudadana en nuestro día a día, en los comportamientos que vemos en nuestro día a día, y tenemos responsabilidades también desde esta red de sociedad, de colectivos y desde las instituciones, ¿no?, públicas, y desde los gobiernos. Lo que está en juego es la democracia básica, y creo que ante eso es fundamental que todas lo tengamos claro, ¿no?, que no es el momento de entender posiciones de unos o de otros, sino que hay quien está en una posición de atacarnos a todos y todas, que es atacar los acuerdos mínimos de una democracia, de los derechos fundamentales, de los derechos humanos básicos, y como se suele decir, a mí no me preocupan los gritos de los malos, sino los silencios de los buenos. Y en ese sentido creo que estamos en un momento de tomar conciencia y hacer ese cordón entre todos y entre todas.
Thanks very much indeed. And finally, Fabian, over to you.
Thanks, Kate. So I think we need to have a strong cooperation at the European level. Several examples have already been mentioned here in the debate where we can present concrete legislative measures, for example, just 2 examples, to combating fake news and regulating social networks. There are some things that we could do on national level, but also in the European Parliament and so on. And that is thing, I think it's are 2 fronts where we need to work together. On negationism, I think there is general tiredness in relation to the pandemic, but the left only wins the right and the far right if it guarantees strong social support, and that it makes sure that the containment does not mean impoverishment. And if we see in the Trump narrative and the far right narrative, they use always the pandemic to critique the left and the moderates that propose containment, that they want to steal your job, they want to steal your business and so on. And we need to guarantee that containment does not mean impoverishment. And we need to build a strong discourse around this. And on the other hand, like we learned, I think, in the recently American elections, that we need to mobilize, we need to take the streets and to make strong and progressive alliance. So when we see the electoral victory of Biden in Georgia, we also see that it only was possible because, like it was said here today, the Black community, the younger people mobilized, organized, and built a strong alliance against the far right. And just to end, I think we need to see the far right as the new normal of the so-called traditional right. So we need to build a strong wall against the far right, a strong cordon sanitaire, and to build a broad progressive alliance that makes sure for everyone that it's possible to live better in our countries, that it's possible to live better in Europe and in America, that it's possible to have a future of peace, of a better and stronger welfare system for everyone. And I think that utopian idea, we need also to fight it, because the idea that we can live better is our strongest idea. But the only thing that the far right has to offer to the people is it's getting worse, and we need to protect ourselves from the other. And we need to win the people for a strong discourse that it's possible to work together. And like Corbyn said, it's possible to make an economy that works for everyone and not just for a few. And I think that is our motto, to build a society that works for everyone. And that thing needs to inspire our struggles in every front we have. Once again, thank Kate for your moderation and for the extraordinary work you have made to put this all together. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much indeed, Fabian, and thanks for your inspiring words at the end and for quoting Jeremy Corbyn, that for the many, not the few, has been such a powerful message. And there is still huge support for it here in Britain, in spite of everything our government has done to demonize Jeremy and his colleagues like Diane and others. It's still an incredibly powerful message. So I've been asked to make some announcements. So, of course, we are part of the European Forum, which, as you know, is building alliances along the lines that Fabian was referring to, working together, different political perspectives. There are many more events. So, for example, tomorrow, we have a debate on the experience of the COVID-19 crisis, the future of health in Europe. So that's tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central European time. And then there's a workshop on Friday at midday, the fight against gender-based violence in Europe. So very, very important, particularly as we know about the surge in domestic violence during the lockdowns. So those are very important events. And of course, you can go to the website to see more of what's coming up over the next couple of weeks. So it just remains to me to first of all thank Gala. I hope we have given you enough to report back on the 28th. So thank you to our rapporteur. Thank you to thank you to all the interpreters for your fantastic work this evening. Big thank you to all you speakers. You've been fantastic. So much food for thought, so many ideas, so much that will take us forward in the struggles ahead. And thank you to all you participants, whether you've been in the Zoom or whether you're watching through social media. Thank you very, very much for your interest and for your participation this evening. So bye-bye, everybody. Hope to see you in Berlin in March. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.